Thank you for joining us for All Things Real Estate. Now here are your hosts, Brad Avergon and Gary Kelley.
Welcome to All Things Real Estate on WCRN, on WMCT, Westboro Community Television, but not Southboro. The Southboro people don't want to hear our stuff. I'm Gary Kelley with Lamaki Realty, and I'm joined as always by
Brad Avergon with Fairway Independent Mortgage.
So Brad, as I look out the window, it's starting to look like spring out there.
It is starting to look like spring, Gary. There's daffodils. I think what are the little ones that pop up? They're not called daffodils. Daffodils are coming up too, but I forget what they're called. The little ones that just pop up first.
Yeah,
but they're popping up everywhere.
They are, and I think that's nice. It's a sign of nature overcoming the winter.
Not that we can complain. It wasn't a bad winter. It wasn't too harsh.
No, not at all. In fact, when I talk to people that plow for a living, they were struggling this winter because there really wasn't that much. It wasn't that bad a winter.
Right.
But at this point, people that haven't decided to either sell their house or, look at houses, they're really starting to pop their heads out.
Absolutely. I've definitely seen an increase in activity for the last couple of weeks.
One of the things that we observe is that we've got people that call us up and say, I'd like to sell my house. Is it too late in the year? It's like, okay, there are still some snow piles around. It's not too late in the year. It depends upon what you need to do to get the house ready. Because I'm a big believer that to maximize your sale value, that the house has to look decent. That doesn't mean spotless, doesn't mean perfect, but it does mean that it should not have clutter all around it. And if you've got a ceiling that 10 years ago there was a water leak and you've re-roofed the house and there's no more water leak, but probably makes sense to put a coat of paint over the stain that might be there. That kind of stuff needs to get done. And one of the things that we can do is we have people that are geared up to come out and help with that, which is very, very useful. What are you seeing, Brad, as you talk to people?
So I'm seeing, situations where like the daffodils that are popping up, they're popping up and they're saying all of a sudden, hey, we're interested now. Can we get a pre-approval? And we're interested in going back into the market and seeing what we can qualify for. And that's good. That's good. So I'm seeing a lot more people. They're making offers on properties. I'm trying to prepare them because the market is still, while it's not as crazy as it was, it's still very competitive to get a home. So maybe, when they're going in, they're not seeing 20 bids, but they may be seeing, they're not probably, unless it's been on for a while, they're going to see a few bids in there. And so they need to be prepared to go oftentimes above asking. I
wanted to take a second and show this chart. It has Lamaki all over that. They're the ones that produce this. I used to do it on my own when I was somewhere else. But it was obviously it was a similar kind of information. And all this comes from the MLS system here locally. But you can see that the number of houses that are on sale on any given Saturday, the last couple of years, it's kind of followed a very similar pattern. And that's one of the things that's interesting about real estate is that it's very cyclical and very predictable. With the exception of the COVID year, okay, everything else is lining right up. And we're just now starting to touch where we were last year at this point on inventory. We've been lagging a bit. So it is still a competitive situation out there. And we are seeing, if you have, I love to tell my stories. We had a house that we put on the market on a Friday night. By Saturday, they had accepted an offer. And that was before the open house on Sunday. And I'm not going to go into the specifics, but it was tens of thousands over asking. It was a cash offer. It was a fairly quick close. And those are things that speak well to the sellers. The less number of things that can make a deal go sideways, like an inspection, the better. I don't like that. I like inspections. I think it's important that the buyer knows what they're getting, and that we don't ever get accused of obfuscating anything. But that's the environment that we're in.
Let me touch on that for a minute, Gary, because I kind of had a very similar situation with a client. So I have a client that was looking for a home. They purchased the home. Everything about the home looked great. I mean, hardwood floors throughout, kitchen was redone. Everything looked fantastic. And the realtor, the buyer agent, looking out for the buyer, said, you know what? We're going to put in a provision that says, you know, if it's $5,000 or less in updates, no big deal. But if it's it's over $5,000, we want the ability to kind of walk away from the deal. So they did a home inspection. They were, and again, understanding it's great when you're on the listing side, no inspection contingency and such, but they did an inspection, and the inspector came out and he noticed something. He said he noticed that the roof was sagging a little bit in one part. Nothing apparent, nothing that somebody would necessarily see unless you were a trained professional. Shingles looked fine, but the roof was sagging a bit. And then so the inspection continued, and at one point he noticed a crack in the foundation that was over in some spots over half an inch wide. And so these were just two things that came up. And again, the seller may not have been aware of what was going on. When he went up into the attic, he found out that some of the trusses, the roof trusses, were not done correctly, and that was the reason for the set. So these are repairs that would have had to go on, that could have cost the buyer a lot of money had they not been aware. I think, if you can get a home inspection, I think it's really, really important. Sometimes you're in a position where you have to negotiate without one. But I know in the past, you've even had them done for some of your clients when it was super competitive out there after the purchase and sale agreement.
Right.
I think it's really important to look at those things because otherwise you can end up with a very unhappy buyer after the closing when they find out, they got caught up in the flurry of negotiating and getting the home, and then they find out the house required a lot more work than they thought.
Yeah, my experience with buyers is when they buy a house, whether it's new or an experienced home, they often have surprises down the road. Okay, something that wasn't what they expected. Sometimes they're like, well, yeah, those cabinets were old looking when you bought the house. Not surprised that you replaced the kitchen cabinets. Other times it's things that are, more hidden that perhaps even a home inspection wouldn't find. And I say to people, that's part of the fun of owning a house. They can say, well, Gary, you're stretching it a bit when you say fun. But at the same time, it's not a surprise that if you have a house that's 50 years old, that you're going to have some sagging here and there. I'm not saying structural. I'm just talking, things hanging over time. Where I get concerned is if the inspector goes up and says, oh, the roof trusses, they're all cracked. Well, that's a red flag. And then it gets into how are they cracked? What direction does the crack go? And then how do you take care of it? Now, I'm not a carpenter. I'm not a structural guy. But many times it's resolved by sistering or adding another board next to the board that's cracked so that there's additional support. I wonder if sistering is one of those words that we can't use now. You can't say master.
Reinforcing is probably a neutral word that you could probably reinforcing.
Okay. Reinforcing. Thank you.
You know what, Gary, you bring up a good point, and that's one of the things that I kind of get on when I get on my soapbox and preach, so to speak. Is I talk about reserves post-closing, because especially with first-time home buyers where they haven't owned a home before, they're going into it, and a lot of them, I know you've been in showings, and I've been out with buyers like this too. They walk in, they see the house on its face looks great, right? Every kitchen looks sparkling, stainless steel appliances, everything looks terrific. They don't understand that it's, you know, there's no warranty on that house specifically, and things are going to break. They're used, and you need to have reserves post-closing, right? You need to have funds that you can dip into to fix a water heater or to fix a truss or something that comes up that you didn't expect. And that's a very, very important thing that I think is often underestimated by clients.
I also look at it, and it's a bit of a tangent, but it's related. How flippers flip a house. Okay, flippers. There's all kinds of ways that they can do this. One is take the sheetrock right down to the studs, and then I wonder if studs is one of those things we can't say anymore. Take the sheetrock right down to the vertical 2x4 members, and replace that. And then, you know, they paint it. Well, okay. Often they have to replace they want to replace the switches. And one of the low cost ways of doing that without really doing what you're trying to do is to just replace the switch cover. So if you go up to a house and you have a nice white switch cover with an ivory or a brown switch underneath it, you know that it was not an exhaustive rehab that went on. They also often do something with the mechanicals in the house. You know, they might replace the furnace, and that's fine, provided that it's sized correctly for the house, because all the systems of the house are sized for the house. And one of the things that, you know, often happens that we try to keep an eye on is someone adds on an addition and they don't have sufficient power in the furnace to heat or cool that particular section of the house. Very common. So we try to keep an eye on that on behalf of our clients. We can only go so far, and that's where the home inspector comes in.
Right. Yeah, it is really important, because, as you said, especially with where a house may be flipped, and for what we mean by that, for some of our listeners that may be familiar, is if you see a house that was on the market a year earlier and went under agreement within a year and now is back on the market again, it means somebody came in typically with the intention of putting a nice facelift on the property, and sometimes they do more in-depth things, but putting a nice facelift on the property and selling it at a profit. And that's
we call that a lipstick renovation.
A lipstick renovation.
Well, no, but that's what it is.
Yeah. And there are some exceptions. There are sometimes people I know, but Gary, you and I have had a mutual client who bought a property and then was relocated by their company, and so they had to sell it again. So it's not always the case, but oftentimes it is.
Brad, if someone wants to reach you, how can they reach you?
Best way to reach me, Gary, is via my cell, which is 978-375-5531, or via my email, which is Brad@Avergon, that's AVERGON.com. And Gary, how do they reach you?
I'm Gary at movewithgary.com or 508-733-6005. We're going to stop it here and pay some bills, and then we will see you in the second half.
See you on the flip side.
Stay tuned. More All Things Real Estate coming right up.